The Cleveland Browns are a bit of a mess right now, and after a Week 1 performance in which they looked absolutely terrible, today let's talk about the Cleveland Browns and what they have to do to get back on track. So as I mentioned, I'm going to be talking about the Cleveland Browns today. If you guys did not watch the Week 1 game, I highly suggest you guys at least check out the highlights because it was really bad for the Cleveland Browns and mainly their quarterback Deshaun Watson. So with that all being said, I want to talk about what I would suggest the Browns do moving forward to try to get their ship sailing in the right direction again. So with that all being said, if you guys do go on to enjoy today's video, hit the like and subscribe button, but let's hop into the video. So before we actually briefly cover what I would do to get this team back on track, I think it's very important that we diagnose what actually happened in the Dallas Cowboys game for Week 1. And when thinking and kind of reflecting back on the game against the Cowboys, there were some positive things that you could definitely take away, but for sure, a lot more negative that you definitely will be thinking about over the next couple weeks. The biggest negative that you have to take away is going to be with Deshaun Watson, the running game, the backup offensive tackles that were just outrageously bad in Week 1, and the defense not really playing up to the expectations that we typically have for them. I will say, before we dive deeper into those negatives, some positives that I do have for this team is that you still have a solid receiving core. I thought Jerry Jeudy was getting open often and was making some good plays. And I also think defensively, you still have a good unit in totality. You just need the offense to kind of pick up their side of things to make the team better as a whole. But that's kind of it for the positives. I guess you can also say the coaching staff is still good because they've won a lot of awards, but at the end of the day, I don't really care. Sticking now to the negatives, the biggest negative that I mentioned was Deshaun Watson. He was utterly trash against the Dallas Cowboys. He was 24 for 45 for 169 yards, 1 touchdown and 2 interceptions. Now, I think it's very important that we do at least recognize how poorly the offensive line did play on Sunday. They gave up multiple sacks. They basically had pressure on what felt like every single down. And there was also multiple times where Deshaun Watson didn't get sacked, but easily could have. He just was able to escape the pocket on multiple occasions. And it also doesn't help Deshaun Watson when there's basically no run game. Jerome Ford averaged 3.7 yards a carry. He had 12 carries for 44 yards. And of course, this should all get better once the offensive lineman gets fully healthy and when you get Nick Chubb back. But I still feel as if the main core issue is within Deshaun Watson himself. Yes, obviously he's going to play better once the offensive line is better and once the run game is a bit more dominant. But I don't think you could really excuse the terrible performance that he had in Week 1. He was missing easy reads. He was hesitant to throw the ball deep, and when he did throw the ball deep, he was basically chucking it out of bounds every single time. He was inaccurate. He wasn't making the right decisions. He got sacked in plays that he probably shouldn't have been sacked in. And the only real positive that I came away from Deshaun Watson's performance was that he was able to evade some sacks multiple times to extend the plays. But after he was able to extend the plays, it wasn't like he was doing anything that well. There were a couple of drives sprinkled throughout the day that I think you can definitely take some positives from. They had one drive specifically when this was actually kind of a game where they were able to drive down the field and put up a touchdown. But outside of that, they had one field goal and a touchdown very late in the game that was basically against the Dallas Cowboys, who weren't trying. But in my opinion, you do at least have to acknowledge those a couple of drives because there were some good plays from Deshaun and the team in totality. But how do you actually fix this Browns team? Well, I think the easiest way to start this off is just by simply stating that they have got to get healthy. Their two starting tackles are Jedrick Wills and Jack Conklin, and of course they missed Week 1, and that was a big time miss that they desperately needed because the backups, DeJuan Jones, James Hudson, and whoever else they put out there was just really bad. They couldn't block Micah, which most tackles can't, but they specifically could not. And the interior offensive line was the only thing that was kind of keeping the play going, but those tackles were just putting so much pressure on Deshaun, so you got to get those guys healthy. I think once those guys do get healthy, the run game should be better, and maybe Deshaun Watson can be a little bit more relaxed and confident in the pocket. It also will help when Nick Chubb does get healthy. If he is what his usual self is, that'll definitely be a big time improvement for this offense. Because as I mentioned earlier, I think there's some really solid weapons. I love Amari Cooper. I think Jerry Jeudy looked really good in his debut. And if we assume that David Njoku comes back here in the next couple weeks, you obviously have a really good tight end. So the big step into being a good team, in my opinion, starts off with just being healthy. And if we assume that those guys do come back healthy and playing at a high level, then what do we do if Deshaun Watson still doesn't perform up to expectations, which at this point I think is starting to become a little bit more of a reality? Well, I think fortunately for this team, they have a very solid backup quarterback in Jameis Winston that I actually do think fits the system quite nicely. If you guys look back to last year when this team was at its most successful point, it was when Joe Flacco was out there just slinging the ball around, just being an absolute madman. And with Jameis Winston, you're going to get a guy who's going to do a lot of the exact same things. Let's not forget, this is the same guy who had a 30 interception season while also throwing for 30 touchdowns. And in a year like this, where you're obviously not going to win a championship, but you're just trying to be a good team, a guy like Jameis Winston could come in here and make this team a little bit more watchable and a little bit more dynamic offensively. That's not to say that he's going to be a good starting quarterback, because Jameis Winston is Jameis Winston. He's going to throw interceptions. He's going to make some bad plays. But at least with Jameis, you know that he's trying to push the ball down the field. You know that he fits the system better than somebody like Deshaun. Right now, after week 1, it's very fair to say that Deshaun Watson is maybe the 3rd or 4th worst starting quarterback in the league. Again, he's inaccurate deep. He doesn't make the right decisions. He is athletic, but it's not like that athleticism is astronomically better than what the defensive players have seen already. So when you have a guy like Jameis who's not afraid to sling the ball and doesn't really get into his own head, is decent in the pocket and can actually be fairly accurate sometimes, I definitely think that that might be the long-term move. And then of course in the offseason, you either trade or you just somehow get off the Deshaun Watson contract and you draft a quarterback in next year's draft, which I definitely do think is a real possibility. Now, unfortunately, this upcoming quarterback class in 2025 isn't particularly strong, and the top quarterbacks like Carson Beck and Quinn Ewers and even Shedeur Sanders, I don't think are great fits for this Cleveland offense. But there's also a couple guys out there that I think have very high upsides, like a Cam Ward or a Jalen Milroe, or even a Quinn Ewers, who I don't think would be a good fit, but definitely has the upside to be very good. And they also won't cost you a lot, and you likely won't have to trade up in the draft because those quarterbacks aren't going to be sought after like a Bryce Young was or like a Caleb Williams is. So hypothetically speaking, let's say Deshaun Watson is terrible, you bench him maybe week 4 or 5, because I do think you should give him time to prove himself. Then you let Jameis Winston start the rest of the season, and hopefully he stays healthy and at least looks, decent out there. And then in next year's offseason, you go out there and you draft a quarterback, such as a Quinn or such as a Shedeur, such as a Cam Ward, Jalen Milroe type of guy. And then moving into next year, you have a quarterback who's getting paid a rookie contract, and yes, you'll still have to deal with the repercussions of signing Deshaun Watson to such a massive contract, but you will at least have a new quarterback who's going to be playing at a higher level that gives this team a potential Super Bowl ceiling. At the end of the day, this is a Browns team that is very good. It has a lot of good pieces. I like a lot of the pieces offensively. They just really struggle to stay healthy. But if you get a quarterback that can potentially be like a top 15 level guy, then I think this team's potential is through the roof. There's not many teams out there that I would rather have, at least roster wise, than a team like Cleveland. Like, yes, I'd rather have Kansas City's roster, even if you took away the quarterback, which we'll hypothetically assume here. I think the Chiefs roster is better, the Ravens roster is better, and several other teams, but the Browns definitely have one of the league's best overall rosters. The only thing that's been holding them back the past couple years has been that quarterback position. So if you were to get rid of a Deshaun Watson, even if you still had to pay him, you'll have a young rookie quarterback that's going to be heading into a situation that is extremely favorable for them. Imagine a quarterback like Quinn Ewers, for example, who I think is, at least right now, my quarterback 1 heading into next year's draft. We'll definitely see how that changes. We're only 2 weeks into the season. But hypothetically, if Quinn were to come in, obviously he's not going to be a finished product, but I think there's enough pieces here for him to basically instantly succeed. You're going to have a good run game as long as the O-line is healthy. It's a good O-line. You have plenty of weapons in Njoku, Judy, and Cooper, and your defense is probably a top 5 level defense in the league. So as long as he comes in there and plays like a Sam Darnold-like quarterback, which at this point Sam Darnold is better than Deshaun Watson, then you're going to be a team that's going to make the playoffs. And if we assume that a young quarterback such as a Quinn Ewers is better than like top 20, then this team can probably win a Super Bowl. I'm not saying they will, but they could. So the biggest 2 takeaways that I have for this upcoming season is that you're going to have to replace Deshaun Watson eventually. I don't think he's it. You got to get healthy. But I think something that could definitely help this team is I think the play calling has got to be better, especially after I saw in week 1. One of the weird things I saw in week 1 was that this team was very hesitant to offer Deshaun Watson any sort of help on the offensive line. What I mean by that is whenever your tackles are playing like absolute trash, you're typically going to want to keep either a running back to help in pass protection, or you're going to try to chip block consistently, or you're going to try some play action. You're going to boot out left or right. Basically stuff that I saw Dallas doing the entire night, because they also started a young, inexperienced tackle, and he was obviously going up against Myles Garrett. So what did Dallas do? do? Well, they roll it out often. They didn't just leave him on an island one-on-one. They helped him with chip blocks, double teams. They kept Ezekiel Elliott back there. And they did all the necessary things to help out their quarterback. I think a team like Cleveland, if they're going to rock with either Jameis or Deshaun, have to help him out, especially when there's a certain unit that isn't doing very well. So in a hypothetical day where the offensive line isn't playing well, they gotta run more play action. They gotta boot out left and right. They gotta do more chip blocking, keeping an extra offensive lineman out there, double teaming the guy who's causing all the pressures. Or in another scenario, let's say the running game isn't doing that well. I think you have to find ways to be creative. Maybe you do more screens. Maybe you do some more exotic styled running plays to try to open up some rushing lanes for the running back. And if the receiving game isn't going well, get your quarterback some easy receptions, some screen passes, some quick RPO reads, all that sort of stuff to build the confidence within your offense and your quarterback to make the offense somewhat decent. Because I believe this defense is good enough to keep their offense in games when the offense isn't producing at a high level. But if you can get your offense to just be average, then this team is going to be good just like they've been the past couple years. So I think by helping out your quarterback who's clearly struggling, it's going to allow your offense to produce at a higher level, obviously, but it's also going to allow your whole team to be better. That was what I found really weird about their game plan against Dallas. You obviously knew you didn't have your starting tackles, and they were going up against one of the best edge rushing units with DeMarcus Lawrence and Micah Parsons, and they really weren't doing much to help them. Yes, they were chip blocking, but half the times those chip blocks actually helped the Dallas Cowboys. So they really should have just installed a game plan that was totally meant to not let those edge rushers dominate the game. So moving forward, I want the offense, the head coach, the offensive coordinator to design plays or design schemes to help your quarterback thrive much better than what we saw last Sunday. I'm not saying that you have to baby step him out there. I'm not saying you have to hold his hand or do anything crazy, but you also have to put a game plan out there that gives your team the best chance to win, and I don't think you saw that against the Dallas Cowboys. Now again, I don't want to put much of the blame on the coaching staff. A lot of the blame should be put on Deshaun Watson. But when you're having a quarterback who's struggling as much as he is, especially with the offensive line struggling as much as they were, I think you have to do certain things to help that offense out, to help your quarterback out, and to help your offensive line. So moving forward, use this as a learning experience, and don't let this happen again. Find ways to help your quarterback and your offensive line and your running game so that your offense can be respectable at least. Because if you keep going in this direction, I don't think this team's going to be that good. So those are kind of the main things that I took away from this game that I think this team could do moving forward to help their team out. I think you have to potentially think about replacing Deshaun. I think you have to get healthy, which is a big thing. And I think you have to game plan a scheme to help out your quarterback and your offensive line. I think these are very simple steps that you can take to have at least a respectable offense and allow your defense to carry your team to over 10 wins. I'm not completely out on the Browns quite yet. I want to see them make these adjustments. And if they do those adjustments, then I definitely think this team could be respectable again. But you guys tell me, do you guys agree or disagree? And if you guys enjoyed the video, hit the like and subscribe button. And I love you guys. Peace.